morning, everybody. I'm going to ask you a question, but don't answer, please. Does Rick Kogan know more about Chicago and its colorful personalities than anyone else? Maybe, perhaps, but he is right there in the top echelon, and he surely must have been born with Chicago DNA. Rick is the son of Herman Kogan, longtime Chicago newspaper man. When he was born, the story was that Studs Terkel arrived at the Kogan home to share a celebration cigar. Growing up, Rick went to the Latin school, and he worked a variety of jobs in his late teens and early 20s, including driving a taxi. Rick was basically a native of the Old Town neighborhood, and he earned his first byline at the age of 16 with the Chicago Sun-Times. He started writing for the Chicago Tribune in 1985, eventually working as a TV critic and then working with the Tribune Tempo section and the Sunday magazine. He also has been part of a WGN radio program which covered news and talk. Early this year, he talked about the legacy of Mike Rapo, just one of many Chicago personalities that he knew. Rick has written many columns recently at the Tribune in support of the 175th anniversary of the newspaper. Perhaps you saw the article which showed Harry Truman holding up the issue of the Tribune with the headline, "Dewey Defeats Truman." Very interesting, the story behind that. Just one of the many interesting stories about the 175th anniversary of the Tribune. Rick is currently a member of the North Shore Senior Center Advisory Council. And before he begins, I want to tell you a very quick story about another time when I was about to welcome Rick Kogan to this microphone. It was probably as long ago as 10 years. And I was standing right here about to welcome Rick when somebody from the reception area ran in here and said, "There's somebody out here who wants to see you. He's supposed to be with Rick." And so I said, "Who is it?" And they said, "It's Charles Osgood." Charles Osgood, the CBS Sunday morning guy? Oh my gosh. I dashed off the podium. I went out front. Sure enough, there was a man named Charles Osgood, but not the one from Sunday morning. Charles Osgood was just a great photographer for the Tribune, accompanied Rick on many stories, and we were delighted to have him and Rick. So it is my great pleasure, and let's give a big welcome to Rick Kogan.
You know, it has been a very long time since I have done this kind of thing. What I swore I would do once the pandemic started, as I said, "Oh man, this is a great break for me. I'll never have to give another speech as long as I live." One slight claim to fame that I want to talk about is I got COVID in March, early March of 2020. And my claim to fame, it's a modest one. I was in the hospital for 6 days. But I was the second person admitted to the COVID ICU section at Northwestern. The way newspapers work, or every editor in the world, once I had to call and say, "Hey, I'm not going to be writing for a week or two," they said, "Well, write about this. Tell us all about it. You have COVID. That's unbelievable." And having watched TV for a week and watching nothing but people dying across the world, I said, "I'm fine. I'm out. I'm not going to write about this." I don't often write about myself. And they said, "Oh, come on, please, please, please," as editors will. And I said, no, 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 until about 3 months later, when a copy editor friend of mine said, "Rick, are you okay?" I said, "Yeah." "Why are you asking?" I said, "I feel fine." "Well, I just edited your obituary." I said, Jesus Christ, what do you mean my obituary? Well, they assigned, when you were in the hospital, they assigned Chris Jones, my friend, still, and the theater critic and the editorial page editor to write my obituary. And I said, come on, let me see it. I gotta see this thing. It was, I've written a lot of obituaries in my life. This was the single worst obituary I've ever read. He didn't have all of my wives in there. He didn't have all of my jobs in there. And he was mortified. But that was the reason I did write eventually about COVID. Memories pour back when I'm up here. And I have no problem living in the past. It is amazing to see old friends of mine like Sandy Pessman, a great writer, like Peter Nolan, who wisely got in the television business so he could make a decent living. Fred Stein, a great photographer. More to the point, I usually come up here to take my friend, Joan Golder, to lunch every once in a while. She lives at North Shore Place. You all must know that place, right? You know it? Yes. Yeah, of course. And that's where I drove this morning. Like a muscle memory thing. I pull in, I come in and say hi. Can we help you? Yeah, I'm supposed to make a speech here today. They say, well, really, what about? I said, I think about me. And then they direct, I have a huge sheet of directions to get here. I've been here a number of times. I am flattered that so many of you would come out on what arguably is the nicest day of the year out there. And I don't have any, I never have had a sort of set speech. I will try to tell you some stories. I will try to make some sense of my life in newspapers. I can't have lunch with Joan today because terrifyingly, I get a call this morning saying, Rick, we have a huge staff meeting this afternoon. There has been no staff meeting in 2.5 years. My guess is that it is going to address our move. As you know, the Tribune printing plant downtown has been sold to Bally's so they can build a wonderful casino. I'm pretty sure this is about where we're going to have to move later this year. So it's not like, you know, I worked at the Sun-Times for a while, then I worked at the Tribune and the Tribune Tower. Then we moved to the Prudential building, and the new owners, the great new owners, like didn't pay rent for a year. So we got kicked out of there and moved into offices at the printing plant. But coming up here, I can't help but think of Sunset Ridge Country Club, where I used to play golf with some frequency with Mike Royko and Tim Weigel. I was kind of, never having joined a country club, I was kind of America's guest. Mike said, leave your clubs here. They actually thought at Sunset Ridge that I was a member. They would say things like in the bar when Mike was a little loaded, they'd say, Mr. Kogan, you can sign for this. I go, well, this is fantastic. Sign and not pay. At any time during this so-called talk, what I've done is throw together a bunch of things that I've written, mostly over the last couple of years. And stop me, ask a question. Say, Rick, that sounds stupid. Rick, that's crazy. That doesn't make any sense. It is kind of about my life and the life of a newspaper guy, if that makes sense to you. And feel free to say to your mate or your partner there, God, you know, he's right. It really is nice out. Let's get the hell out of here. When the Tribune was in the Tribune Tower, I would often, every single day, make it a point to go stand in the middle of the Michigan Avenue Bridge. It is my favorite place in the city of Chicago because there time stands still, or as still as it can, where the sky comes together with water and buildings, and the present sits there with stone and brick and glass, and whatever you make of the tourist kind of open mouth, wow, look at the Trump Tower. I sit there and I can hear, thanks in large part to my father, the DuSables talking in the little cabin down on the riverbank. I can hear the bloodthirsty Iroquois burning Fort Dearborn. I can see the guys turning and reversing the Chicago River, which is a miracle of sort. It's a fool's game for me to imagine what anyone would say now. Any of those people that I hear, I'm sure there would be, wow. And if they spoke this kind of language, holy shit. Or who's Donald Trump? Millions have come here since. And I am ever curious about what they have to say about the city now. The city that all of them, in ways large and small, helped to shape. And what will they say about it, more importantly, tomorrow? The city is an organic thing, changes every day, every hour. And trying to capture it in any moment, to me, seems a little nutty. We play, suffer, work, parade, hope, love, dance, pray, party, vote, eat. We live our lives in a real sense as a message to the future. But what is that message? In order to find out, you have to listen. And when I hear something, I hear the sound of a typewriter. It literally is, as romantic as it might sound, my first memory. The sound of a typewriter with my father banged out these great two fingers. And he was a great newspaper man and a U of C intellectual, but he still typed with two fingers, and I do too, even on a computer. He wrote books about the city, books about many of its most colorful characters. But before I was old enough to read these books, like Lords of the Levee, like Give the Lady What She Wants, he wrote them in my heart and in my head. We'd be standing together, and these are memories that I have, on the Michigan Avenue Bridge, and he would be telling me stories about the massacre at Fort Dearborn. There we were driving down 63rd Street, and he'd be telling me about stories about White City, about the Columbian Exposition, about the Ferris wheel. Think of what that did for a kid. Wherever we went and whatever we did, it was possible for me to feel the pulse of the past. Add to that the characters who would visit our living room, because my parents were not famous, but they were pretty well connected. My father was a newspaper man. My mom worked as head of PR for the Art Institute, and our living room was filled with people. We first got exposed to these people. My younger brother, 16 months younger, real Irish twins, brother Mark, when my mother would come in the middle of the night, was to us, we're 8 and 7, and say, come on, get up now. Come on in and say goodnight to all these nice people. So my brother and I, in pajamas covered with race cars or cowboys and Indians or something, would have to trudge down this hall, go into this living room that was filled with smoke, because everybody smoked then, and music, and the sound of, this is what made me a drinker, I'm sure, the charming sound of ice cubes knocking against glasses. And we would say goodnight to all these nice people. It was horribly, horribly, horribly embarrassing, but it certainly informed me. Those people were people like Studs, Nelson Algren, who dated my aunt, unfortunately, for a while, for her, and writers and people from the newspapers. What it taught me is that there was something beyond the sort of cliched city, something beyond the gleaming Millennium Park bean. It's a city that the late great newspaperman and a mentor of mine, M.W. Newman, described as, quote, old-time streets behind the skyline, where the city lives or withers with miles of empty land. It is out there, this uncelebrated city. For me, I'll give you just one example. That's what I've spent most of my life and most of my professional life exploring, the uncelebrated city. I will never forget, to bring up the great name of your old buddy, Charles Osgood. We would just drive around until we saw something interesting, and we would stop and explore. So one day we're driving west on the Eisenhower Expressway. We get off at, I guess, Lexington or something. We pull up, and Osgood, who was always hungry, he was starving. If he ate 5 minutes ago, he'd go, God, I gotta get something to eat. I gotta get something to eat. And we see a black man standing there with 3 coats on. It's the middle of winter, selling peanuts. And Charlie says, buy me a bag of peanuts. That was the other thing about Charlie. I almost always had to buy his food. And Fred Stein, who knows him well, is going, that's Charlie. So we pull off. Charlie gives the man $1, gets the peanuts, start to drive away. And I go, hey. He says, oh my God, I know. And he pulls back up and he just says to the guy, thank you. And the guy starts talking to us. And so we get out of the car thinking, well, this might actually be a story of some kind. The man's name was Thomas Gaither. He had been selling peanuts, little bags of peanuts at that Eisenhower exit ramp for 25 years. He had put 2 kids through college, and he was telling us, well, one is a doctor that I don't see him very much because he moved away. The other one is a school teacher. And if I had done anything, that's a good thing that I'd done, don't you think? And I go, yeah, that's a good thing. And you can be very, very proud. He was there 6 days a week for decades. And I'm thinking to myself, I know people who complain if they think they've gotten the wrong year wine at a restaurant. I said, don't you ever get tired? Don't you ever? Well, Rick, there are days when the people come and they don't talk to me. They don't say hello or they don't say thank you. But look, I get to smile every day. I get to be out here, whether it's cold or whether it's sunny or whether it's raining. And look what I did for my 2 kids. He said, and I quote this here, you cannot expect a good day every day. You got to be patient. And no matter how that wind blows, you got to keep smiling. You know, I often think of that man and that saying when the news comes across every morning of people being shot and killed with increasing frequency across this city. You can hear it argued, and there was a Tribune editorial, one of the worst I've ever read, a few years back that said, quote, Chicago remains resolutely non-famous, off the radar screen, the flyover city, the world capital of nothing. Chicago's problem is that if it has an image at all, it's 50 years out of date. Al Capone, Carl Sandburg, City of the Big Shoulders, all that sort of thing. Where that roar brought, excuse me, not COVID, just haven't made a speech in a while. You know, we're that roaring, brawling, true city on gritty, city on the lake, crooked but rollicking, that toddling town, not ready for reform yet. That old Chicago probably is gone forever. I argue it is not gone forever. I argue that you can hear Carl Sandburg in the voice of some young poet getting up at the Green Mill to read his poetry. I think Muddy Waters still lives in the hands of Buddy Guy, and that Louis Sullivan whispers to any young architect dreaming of buildings here. And I like to think that Mike Royko guides the hand of a young Cub reporter. I'm fearful that many of the young Cub reporters with whom I work don't know the name Mike Royko. They don't know the name Studs Terkel. They don't know the name Ann Landers, AKA Epi Letterer. They don't know the name Fred Stein. They don't know the name Peter Nolan. They don't know the name Sandy Pestman. And without knowing that history, without knowing what those people did, they're cast adrift. They're cast adrift on Twitter. Not a fan. I really think I should come up for your weekly internet, how to use an iPhone thing, because I'm really a Luddite. I really. I wonder sometimes if the American, thank you. And then just call a doctor in about 20 minutes and go back in the ICU. Isn't this funny that it literally is because I have not done anything like this in more than 2 years. Oh, look, more water too. And I was offered to do this by Zoom, but I hate Zoom. I find it the iciest, email is icy, but Zoom is just, I suppose there are reasons to do it, but not to my mind. Plus, I always think the 1 or 2 times I've done it, I say, Jesus Christ, I look like I'm 150 years old on this camera. What is wrong with my computer? I really wonder, and I've wondered increasingly over these dangerous times, and it really is getting dangerous downtown. Anywhere in this city, as dangerous downtown as anywhere as neighborhoods used to be. And it's indiscriminate, and you see it every morning when you wake up. I remember I was driving around years ago when the Robert Taylor homes were still standing on the south side. And we're driving around and we see a school, a grammar school called the Farron School. So, okay, we've never been in a school, sidewalks. We go in there. It was the first time, 15, 20 years ago, first time I ever saw a metal detector in an elementary school. And it literally punched my heart. So these are little kids. We wandered around and we found the only white teacher there was a woman named Carla Kelly. And she was instructing a group of second graders. And we just sat there and watched her, and she would she'd sit in the corner on a rug and she would read to them. And when class was over, they lined up and she gave them each a hug and said, "You be careful out there. You be careful out there." Charlie and I sort of fell in love with this woman and were fascinated with the school and fascinated in a different kind of way with the neighborhood. We spent a week with the class, and at the end of that, and they got familiar with us too. At the end of the class, Carla asked all the kids to draw something that they wished they could one day see or have. So one kid drew a little boat. Another kid drew a car. Another fascinating kid, I really wonder whatever happened to him, drew this big pile of green. And we said, what is that? He said, "That's a big pile of money." That guy may have, though he's not black, he could have turned out to be Elon Musk. And then one little girl drew a tree. We said, "What's this, honey? What is this?" "It's just a tree. It's a tree that I want to see a tree." And we saw the other kids, they had things more discernible. And at the end of the thing, we're walking out the hallway. We said goodbye to them. They said they'd miss us. They said, "Let us keep these drawings." And Charlie was saying, what do you think that tree was all about? And at that point, we walk outside, the corner of 55th and State, outside, and we both just look around like this. No trees. And we thought to ourselves, this girl is 7 years old and has never seen a tree. We came back and asked Carla to arrange for us to meet her mom, who was a semi-drug addict. She lives on the 9th floor in one of those horrifying high rises. It's where I learned that many people in the high rises, even on upper floors, sleep on mattresses on the floor because bullets fly. And they don't want them to fly into the head of the children. So we arranged with the mother to take this little girl, Caitlin, which is a strange it's an Irish name, and how she got it, I have no idea, to take her out, to take her someplace. And the mother said, okay, for $50. And the next day we drove down with Carla Kelly, who was pale white and with flaming red hair. They got in the back of Osgood's car, and like some demented character, I said, "Caitlin, I'm going to put this blindfold on you." okay, that's okay. That's okay. You can put the blindfold on. So I did. And we're driving north. And it must have looked so bizarre because Osgood, tell me if I'm wrong, Fred, kind of looked like if he said he was the Unabomber, you'd go, yeah, I think that's what the Unabomber would look like, the beard and Levi jacket and that whole thing. So we drive to the Lincoln Park Zoo, right to the corner of Webster and Stockton. And we get out, and Caitlin's still with her blindfold. And we go out, right, where the entrance to the zoo is. It's really beautiful, a million trees. And so I spin her around and take off the blindfold. And she's like this. She's like, I've never seen such joyful awe on a person's face. And she goes, Mr. Rick, are we okay? Are we okay? And I go, what do you mean? Of course we're okay. Of course we're okay. What, are we dead? And is this a dream? I said, no, honey, this is Chicago. This is a part of Chicago you've never seen. And she spins a little more and she then says, this is wonderful. This is the kind of place I want to go when I die. I have never, for a moment or maybe even a day, forgotten that story. Tried to track her down years later, and we all come and go. We all leave our marks, and those marks become our history, and they cannot be erased. That's why I don't know when it really started. It's gotten very intense over the last couple of years, where I love going back into the past. And my head is filled. I lived in New York for a while, I lived in Spain for a while, but Chicago is it. I feel connected here in real ways. I feel like I can touch the soul of Chicago and Northfield and Northbrook too. I'm fully aware that there will be miracles and mistakes, some that I won't even see. I have a daughter turning 18 tomorrow, and I want her to see this too. And I wonder, what will she see? How will she react? One of my great moments in my life was Studs was getting old. Studs Circuit was getting old. And it's a lovely thought that he and my father shared a cigar. They actually shared a drink because they both like to drink, and because my father never smoked cigars. And I think he took my father out from the hospital. I was born at Wesley Memorial. Anybody remember Wesley Memorial Hospital? It's part of the huge Northwestern complex now. I took Fiona when she was 2 over to meet Stud, because he'd never met her. He had some health problems. And what I recall vividly of that encounter is Studs and I talked for a while. And of course, Studs was about to go in the hospital, but he was being filmed by 60 Minutes Canada that day. So there's a huge film crew, and they had just left. And we sat there, and Fiona sat on his lap. And he was telling me stories, and he was telling Fiona stories. Now, Fiona, you didn't know your grandfather. He was my best friend. He was a great man. And Fiona's 2. So, but what I'm realizing is the more Studs talks, he's got this white hair. He's got, his hand, he always wrapped his hand in rubber bands for whatever reason to, use, I suppose. He got his pens, the little red check shirt. And I realized, good God, Studs is like a grown-up doll of some kind. And of course, Fiona thinks he's interesting. And that voice, Fiona, you remind me of an actress. Did you know Fiona Flanagan? She's an Irish actress. You have her look. And Fia's too, going. But for 1 hour, she sits on his knee. Like this. Now your mom, your grandmother Mary Lou, she's a wonderful woman. She's a beautiful woman in her day, but you're never going to really get to know her. My mother just died. You're never really going to get to know her. There's so much that you can do, though. I'm old. You're not going to know me. You're not going to know me in a few years. But you know what, Fiona? I have a wish for you. Fiona is sitting here, and Studs is going like this. I have a wish that you grow up. You grow up in a city where nobody is hungry, Fiona. Fiona, I want you never, ever to meet anybody who does not have a place to live. I want you to grow up in a world that is fair to everybody. And Fee is nodding her head. The ex-wife comes out from the kitchen and takes a photograph. Just one photograph. Fred, this is an amazing photo story. Just one photo, not even on an iPhone with like an Instamatic camera. It is my all-time favorite photograph. I will send it to you, to one of you. I will send it to this institution. So if you want to see it, feel free to see it. It is the photo I want to see when I die. It's the last image I want to see because Studs is dreaming for Fiona. And he's pointing at a wall when you see this photograph. He is creating this kind of utopian world with all of Studs's, sometimes naive, liberal, wonderful vision. That's what I want her to see. I'll tell you about Roger Ebert, who I miss too. My father gave Roger his first byline. Roger was a student at the University of Illinois, and my father ran a publication, I hope some of you remember, God, is this going back, called Panorama, which was in the Daily News. It was the first arts and entertainment section, freestanding section in American newspapers. He wrote to Marshall Field IV this amazing 40-page, double-sided, single-space memo explaining why arts and culture needed to be covered because it was part of the fabric of life. And if newspapers covered sports and horoscopes and everything else, they needed to do that. Roger freelanced a piece, sent him a piece about the death of poet Brendan Behan. And Roger went on, of course, to give millions and millions of words. He was a great writer. Here is an example. This is from a 2005 film starring that local celebrity and Mother Macaulay girl, Jenny McCarthy. Dirty Love wasn't written and directed, it was committed. Here is a film so pitiful, it doesn't rise to the level of badness. It is hopelessly incompetent. It stars and was scripted by Jenny McCarthy, the cheerfully sexy model who, judging by this film, is fearless, plucky, and completely lacking in common sense or any instinct for self-preservation. My mother loved Roger and made Roger dinner many times at our house. Also in Michigan, where they lived sort of close by to one another. She cooked and she saved, and in a weird way, Roger saved her life by getting her into AA. My mother was a serious drinker, and she may not have been the best AA member because one day I would ask her, how's everything going with the AA thing? She goes, oh my God, I was in there. There's a fabulous, Ron Majors told a great story about how he was drunk in Alaska. And he was so drunk that he got on a horse and he was sitting on it backwards. And I said, Mom, do you understand the concept of Alcoholics Anonymous? Oh, nonsense. Nonsense. Roger tells great stories up there too. For her, it was like some kind of variety show whenever she went there. I did grow up in hard drinking times. That's the way it was in newspapers then. Not everybody, but a lot of us. I'll tell you a great story about, apropos of nothing, actually, that I think I learned that I was half Jewish because my father was telling me a story. 2 blocks from our house was the saloon of the infamous Patty, Chicago Ain't Ready for Reform, Bowler, the alderman of the 43rd Ward. And he had an affection for most reporters because they could write about him. He had a great affection for my father, who did not write about him, but who had written a book called Lords of the Levee about Bathhouse John Coughlin and Michael Hinky Dink Kenna, the notorious alderman of the 1st Ward in the city, who really did set the bar for corruption that Patty always was striving toward. My father was telling me I'm probably about 12. I think I had some vague inkling. We were raised without any formal religion because my mother was a terribly lapsed Catholic and my father was a sort of intellectually, emotionally lapsed Jew because he had fought in World War II, and that kicked religion out of him. But he's telling this story about Patty saying, Patty wanted to take my father to Germany because Patty would go on, maybe every month he would go on trips either to Germany or to Hong Kong, on an alderman's salary. So he's like, Herm, my father's name was Herman. Herm, you got to come with me. You got to come with me. It's the greatest place. They treat me like a king over there. We'll stay at the greatest hotels. We'll go to Munich. They have all these great beer halls and it'd be my treat. So over the course of a half hour, my father's, no, Patty, I really can't. I can't go. The kids, work, something. Finally, Patty is unrelenting. You got to go. I'll pay for everything. It'll be the greatest time of your life, blah, blah. My father finally says, Patty, look, I'm Jewish, and I am not about to go and drink and cavort in the very beer halls where Adolf Hitler formed the Nazi Party. The way my father described it is, Patty lets this sink in and he rubs his big fat face of his. And he says, geez, Herm, can't you let bygones be bygones? That tells you a little something about politics. The Stud stories, before Roger died, he wrote about Studs. Studs died on 2008 on Halloween night. Roger, in his terrific book, Life Itself, wrote that Studs was the most widely, deeply loved man I ever hoped to know. And I said that Roger embraces the philosophy of Studs. Studs' philosophy is life is over when you stop living it. That's been a kind of guide to me. I remember I wrote Studs' obit and spent a lot of time with Studs because Studs had difficulty hearing. Studs never drove a car because he never had a driver's license. So from the time he was about late 80s, when there's like, oh, Studs, let's have a 90th birthday party for Studs at the Historical Society. Let's do this. I would accompany him all over because we developed this kind of weird shorthand where I could go, Studs, Mahalia, Rick, I'm so glad you mentioned that. Mahalia Jackson was a dear friend of mine. There was one time when he says, Rick Carlson says, Rick, we got to go up to Northbrook, by the way. And I go, okay, what is it? They've asked me to speak. Well, who asked you? And let me get the information. So I call this nice woman. He gives me the number. I call this nice woman. I go, hello. And she goes, oh, hello. I said, I understand you've asked Studs Terkel to have a speaking engagement. Oh, yes, he was so nice. Well, what is the speaking engagement? Well, it's myself and the 4 other women who were in my book club. And you want Studs Terkel, who is 92 at this point, to come up and speak to your book club? Yes, we just read that marvelous book, Working. I said, miss, ma'am, he's 92. 92. We went. we went. When Studs, he wrote his own epitaph, and it was, "Curiosity did not kill this cat," which I love. And I think his Studs got up every morning curious to meet someone new, to hear a new piece of music, to read something new. And I think that's one of the things that kept him so vibrant and so alive. He also said his wife Ida had died almost 9 years before he did. And he would tell me every time I'd go up to see him, he goes, "Rick, you gotta do me a favor. When I check out," he never used the word die, death, or any variation of those. He used the word check out because he was a hotel kid. He was raised in a hotel. "Rick, when I check out, you got to do me a favor. You see, their Ida's ashes are over there." They were in a little urn next to a vase of daisies. "Yeah, Studs, I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to hear about this. When I check out, I want you to take me and mix my ashes with Ida's and bury us in Bughouse Square." Bughouse Square is the Washington Square Park right across the street from the Newberry Library. And I said, a number of times, I said, "I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to talk about this. And I want you got to promise me, you got to do that." We did eventually do it. But at the time I said, "Studs, that is against the law." And his response was, "Let them sue us. Let them sue us." I remember Studs was the MC of this fantastic memorial service to Mike Royko. Studs outlived Mike, which was held at the Harold Washington Library. There was one kind of private one that was held at Wrigley Field of all places. But on the publication of the collection of Mike's work, Studs was the MC, and he was just, you can see it online. I don't know, if you just search out Turco Memorial, it's an hour long. I spoke, and Ellen Warren spoke, a number of other people spoke. I remember my buddy Ann Landers just showed up. She was not scheduled to speak, but she was Ann Landers, and she spoke and talked about how much she loved Mike. Tim Weigel was particularly funny. Mike used to say about Tim that Tim was the only Yale graduate he knows who dresses like a Blue Island pimp. Mike went to the Tribune before Epi did, and when Epi came over to the Tribune after her contract was up, he said to her, "Thank God you're here. Now all those wackos who write to me can write to you." They still did. They still did write to Mike. Mike was a dear guy and a role model, and I miss them all. What can I tell you? And they're all gone. And as I said before, I don't know if the current crop of young reporters aspire, and many of them very, very good, aspiring to change the world. There are a lot of young reporters who come in there, and we all know this, who expect to have a column, a week after they started, even though they do not have anything to say. But when I think of those people, I think of my friend, I'm not a friend, I think of my father's friend, Norman McLean, the teacher at the University of Chicago, who wrote late in life, "A river runs through it." And I think of this sometimes. Eventually, all things merge into one, and a river runs through it. The river was cut by the great flood and runs over rocks from the basement of time. And some of those rocks are timeless raindrops. Under the rocks are the words, and some of the words are theirs. I am haunted by waters. I am haunted by words. And I love dipping back into it. I just reread, why did I do this? Because I was sending the book to somebody. I wrote a book many years ago called Dr. Nightlife's Chicago, a Guide to Local Watering Holes. It was during my tenure of the greatest job I've ever had in newspapers when I'm 26 years old. The Daily News and Sun-Times, an editor comes up to me and says, I think we have a new beat for you. I go, okay, what is it? We'd like you to cover bars and nightclubs. And I'm like, am I dead? Did I get to heaven? Bars and yeah, we'll pay your expenses. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. So I did for one. It was eventually sort of collected in a book. And I asked Mike, God, that book is in 1978, I think. I asked Mike to write the foreword, and it's a wonderful foreword. It's virtually impossible to get the book anywhere. He wrote in the book, although I have not visited every joint in this book, I've been to some. And as philosopher Slats Grobnik used to say, I've drank out of waste toilets. Of the author, I can only say that I know him to be a tireless and thoroughless researcher. And it would be nice if you bought this book, since his liver will do him in before too long. I am very, very happy that it did not do me in, and that I am still able to write, but I'm certainly aware there's no immortality for newspapermen, no assurance that in now or in 20 years that anybody in the business, whatever the business is by then, will know these names and will know my name. Maybe there'll be some faint echo. They will never be able to understand the connection that people that you and you and you and me had to them. You opened the paper and you found them. There they were, found their bylines or their faces, and it was like bumping into an old friend. And you saw everyone in the morning on the way to the bus or train, the reliable, funny, sometimes infuriating, but always interesting voice, always there. I cannot get that from my laptop, and I certainly cannot get that from my phone. And so we fade away into dusty books, dustier memories. The great newspaperman Ben Hecht once wrote this for a colleague. We know each other's daydreams and the hopes that come to grief, for we write each other's obits and they're God Almighty brief. There's also this from Brendan Bahan, whom I started this because Roger wrote a piece about him. Bahan wrote, the most important things to do in the world are to get something to eat, something to drink, and somebody to love you. Or in the way that Studs used to close off his radio show. And I'll close off this, but happy to answer any questions and tell other stories from Studs. Thanks for listening. Take it easy, but take it. I don't know if that makes sense. I owe another great newspaper man back there. Alan Henry is here too. Anybody have a question?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Let me ask mine and I'll come right back. Were you named after Ricardo's restaurant, Rick?
Yes. It used to somewhat embarrass me. It certainly embarrassed me in fourth grade at LaSalle School when I was in there. And my teacher was named, I still remember her, Mrs. Corrigan, and she began to refer to me as Richard. And fourth grade, I'm pretty young. And I said, well, Mrs. Corrigan, that's not right. My name is Rick. No, Rick, that's a nickname. That's a nickname. That's not your name. I go, well, I think it is, Mrs. Corrigan. I think it is. No, you'll be Richard. I made the horrible mistake of going home that afternoon and telling my mom that story. So the next day, she accompanies me to school to enlighten Mrs. Corrigan. And that is when I learned. But I also learned a few years later, I said, Mom, I know I'm named after Rick Ricardo, but he spelled his name R-I-C, and you have spelled my name R-I-C-K. And she said, well, we didn't want to be totally unconventional. And I'm thinking, you named me after a bar owner, for God's sake. Where's the convention in that? But yes, that is very true, because my parents met, first set eyes on each other at Ricardo's in 1948. Yeah.
Okay, we have a question here.
Yeah, I just was curious. One of the great columnists from the Tribune was John Cass. And I just wondered what your view of his and why he left the Tribune.
Well, I've known John well for a long time. John maintains on his subscription thing, internet thing, johncassnews.com, that he was forced out by the woke young people, unionist people there who diminished him for addressing what he thought was a Jewish conspiracy orchestrated by George Soros. The thing that gets me about John now is the way in which he beats the shit out of this place that was his home for many years and gave him a considerable amount of money when he left. Let it go is my theory. And on his blog, he's become sort of aggressively conservative and right, so aggressively and conservative right that he's about to fall off the face of the flat earth he thinks we live on. That answer it?
Another question?
Yeah.
Do you have a question? Okay, right here.
All right, you may not remember, I met you in March. of
I thought you
1980.
were going to say we were married for a while.
No.
You may not remember.
My husband and
I would
I-
remember, dear.
My husband and I were in Acapulco on our delayed honeymoon, and he was in the water, and the young woman you were with was also in the water, and you were sitting next to me, and we were chatting. We were young, and remember that, being young?
In
Yeah.
Acapulco.
In Acapulco. And- Yes, I don't remember the hotel, maybe it was like Continental or Intercontinental, it was two buildings. And I can refresh your memory maybe with who you were with. I don't know if you want to know.
Wow. I've been in Acapulco.
Yeah, with a woman from the Washington Post, if I remember correctly. Short hair, slight.
Correcto.
Okay,
Now it's
it's
coming
coming
back to me. I
back
did not
to you.
marry her, but
no, and you were sitting talking about, I at the time, interestingly enough, was working off of 63rd Street at an elementary school similar to Farron. And you were telling me how you were at Sun Times, and I didn't get the Sun Times, and I didn't know who you were. And you said Dr. Nightlife, and I was like, And soon after,
that's not exactly on the
No.
level of sophistication level of Cary Grant. Yes, I'm in Acapulco and I'm
However.
going, yes, perhaps you've
But-
heard of Dr. Nightlife.
then you came to the Tribune, and I knew you. But I owe you a debt because you bought me a Diet Coke. And for all these years, I have owed you a Diet Coke. So I have brought it for you.
Want me to give it? Okay.
I'm sorry, there's no room.
Oh, and it's cold. It's cold.
That is so sweet of you. Was that the guy you were with in Acapulco? Good.
It's cold too.
That is so sweet. That's a great memory. If I still talk to her, I'd call Karen and tell her.
First of all, thank you so much.
Oh,
for an
sure.
extraordinary presentation. Secondly, I wanted to ask about Studs Terkel, that marvelous base, or I see a whole cellar full of tapes he made of all those programs. Where are they, and are they accessible?
Many of them are accessible. If you type in Studs Terkel archive, you'll find them. I mean, the History Museum, now it's called the History Museum. It was the Historical
You're saying they're
Society.
downloadable?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah. Oh,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Easily accessible. Not all of them. I will recommend two to you. there is a great, when Studs published what became his first major bestseller, Division Street America in 1967, my father and Mike Royko hijacked his show to interview Studs about that book. You can imagine what it does to me. I mean, these are the three gods of my life, but it's hysterically funny. Studs is so embarrassed, he's giggling the whole time. He's giggling the whole time. There's another remarkable interview. There are a lot of remarkable interviews there, but Studs interviewing the 23-year-old Bob Dylan is one of the most striking interviews. First time Dylan was ever in Chicago. He was playing some concert at the, the USC. He's had his second album out. And at one point, Studs starts the show by saying, and I sort of like, I'm sitting here with a young man from New York. He looks like he's a folk singer. He looks like Huckleberry, a young Huckleberry Finn. His name is Bob Dylan. And so wrote about him this. And then they talked for a little while. And Studs says, could you play a song? Could you play a song for us? And you hear Dylan, who is certifiably the Bob Dylan we have all known now. He is the same. Well, yeah, Studs, it'd sound better if you played it on the disc. Yeah, but I'd love to hear. I'd love to see it, watch you play it. Yeah, but it would sound better on the disc if you played the disc. You can play the disc. But Bob, I'd love to see how you play and how you look when you're playing. Studs beats him down. And you hear on this recording, Dylan unpacking his unpacking his guitar case and playing. And he plays about 7 songs during the show. It's remarkable. But there's so much. Don't blame me, but you can get lost in the archive. You really can. There are 5,000 shows, and they've only, I think, found the money to put, 2,000 up. But there are some amazing interviews.
Ron Mantegna on Zoom. Do you have some questions from the Zoom audience?
Yes, thank you, Don.
Yes, I don't
we
care
have a
if
couple.
it's Zoom audience, just joking.
We can hear you and you can hear us. We've had at least as large a group on Zoom as we have in the auditorium. So it's been fascinating. You know many interesting people. You've known a bunch. Who might be a couple of the most interesting persons that you've met? And maybe even tie into that, who might be the one or two you would love to interview? But go first and tell us who might be your most interesting if you had to pick a couple.
I've mentioned any number of them. I mean,
Was any stand out?
yeah.
They all stand out to us. I'm wondering to
Well,
you.
they stand out to me too. I mean, people like Mike and Studs and my dad were all terribly influential in my life, but they were in part, not that they taught me any lessons. It was just that their lives had been so full and interesting that just hearing about them, there were lessons in the stories. I've interviewed, and I got to tell you too, I talked about that guy, Thomas Gaither, selling the peanuts. And that was a very, not life-changing, but slightly life-altering encounter. Maybe when they tell me, Rick, you got a week to live, I'll sit down and make a list of all the people. It's an impossible chore because it basically changes all the time. Something I will see or do or read will spark a memory of someone I have, hadn't thought of in a while.
Let me take a chance on this one then. What about one or two that you feel, whoa, I would love to interview that person, and you haven't yet?
Well, if there is one, I'd love to interview God or a God. Boy, who's alive now that I haven't interviewed. Wow. I'd take a whack at Bill Clinton in a very, very intense, please speak the truth, not for a newspaper, Bill Clinton? That's a very good question.
Okay, let me, in the interest of time, let me cover one. We know that you do the bios of people after they've passed. So you do these.
Yes.
I imagine I would tell Brother Joe Montaigne, kind of stay away if you get your notepad and you come up to him.
You think I'm like Typhoid Mary or something? No, they don't.
Here's a serious question from that. What obituary was, and this is from Diana Kappas, what obituary was hardest to write? Which one did you learn the most about the deceased person?
Well, the hardest one to write, no question, was the one of Mike Reicha, where I got a call on let's say, Tuesday from Anne-Marie Lipinski, the editor of the paper, saying, get in here right now. Mike's had an aneurysm and he's in Northwestern Hospital. We need you to write his obituary. So I went in at midnight and I'm sitting there, and I never, ever, ever, there's a newspaper tradition of writing obituaries before a notable person dies. When I came to the Tribune in the late 80s, I was told, Rick, we'd like you to do an obituary of Studs. I go, I just saw Studs. What do you mean? He's 72. You didn't need an obituary. I've never done a pre-death obituary. So I went in, I'm sitting there, and Anne-Marie is saying, well, is it done yet? I go, no, not yet. And I put her off for an entire week because I talked to Judy, Mike's wife, and realized that it's not, he could go at any minute, but I realized that I could write it at any minute too. And I've often felt it with some pre-cooked obituaries, you miss the emotion of the moment, or at least I did. Mike's was the hardest probably that I ever did.
Okay. A quick one and then a more complex one for the last question. Quick one was, what was your preferred cocktail at Ricardo's? Joanne is asking that.
Well, as a young man, I was quite fond of Jack Daniels. And then as I've gotten older, vodka, which Mike in his later years did become a vodka drinker as opposed to a Scotch drinker. Studs was a martini guy. And I just couldn't handle Jack Daniels anymore. It was Tony Fitzpatrick, a local artist in Chicago, had a drink in 25 years, once told me that he stopped drinking because when he was in bars, the person with the most missing teeth in the bar was a Jack Daniels drinker. And that's one of the reasons Tony stopped drinking. Now your complex question.
Yeah, this one is a little bit tougher, Rick. Looking at Chicago, and based on lots of what's happening lately with crime, what's your prognosis for Chicago going forward? Is there a book in that, or an answer you can give us today?
There's no answer I can give. I don't think anybody out there has the answer. I don't think Paul Vallis does. I don't think Lori Lightfoot does. A city is indeed an organic thing, and there needs to be, there are neighborhoods and people in this city who have been disenfranchised for generations. They live in places where there is no hope. Doesn't make me angry that an 11-year-old a couple of days ago was with a gun, was involved in a carjacking. It breaks my heart. It breaks my heart. But you're talking about disinvestment in neighborhoods that breaks up family units. You're talking about economic disaster in many cities. It's going to take a generation if someone can figure out what the problem is. Ken Griffin has moved away. Ken Griffin had, a private army here, basically, to guard. He had place just across a little street from the ancient water tower, and he's left. And I think it is heartbreaking to me. A lot of people I know live downtown. They won't go out after dark. They won't go to old restaurants. I have no solution. Sadly, I think there are a lot of people out there doing grassroots things. I mean, Arnie Duncan, was never fond of him as an educator or cabinet member, but he's got a really interesting organization that is trying to do something about violence. And it is violence that's shattering this city. I don't know how many of you have been downtown, but when you lose 7 floors of Macy's in the water tower and other stores, there's a whole block where Brooks Brothers used to be, empty storefronts on Michigan Avenue. It really makes me want to cry because I love this city. And I grew up, as I'm sure many of you did, not as old as some and older than many. I had in my generation, the last kind of free generation, the last kind of, hey, Mom, I'm going out, and be home before it gets dark. Think of that kind of amazing freedom. That vanished a long time ago, frankly. I think the school system got shitty. And there's so many problems, so many. And maybe my daughter will solve them.
We want to thank you so much. Let's give him a big welcome.
You want one last story? I'll leave you with one last Mike Royko story
Oh, okay.
to tell you what kind of guy Mike was. And what I think is the greatest sentence Mike Royko ever wrote. So Mike moved up here to Winnetka, last place he lived, with his 2 adopted kids, one of whom, Sam, is thinking of running for alderman. Good luck. What would Mike say to that? So Mike would come into the office at Tribune Tower only a couple of days a week. He mostly stayed in this bizarre 4th floor office that he had in Winnetka. And one day he's down. He says, "Come on, let's have a drink." Always willing. We went down to Billy Goat's in the middle of the afternoon. It's like 3:00. We sit at the end of the bar in what used to be and is still sometimes called Wise Guy's Corner. There's really nobody there except a guy in sort of construction man clothes, sitting there watching TV, drinking shots at 3:30 in the afternoon. And the minute we sit down, he looks on, sees Mike. It's like, oh, look who's here. Big shot, big man, Mike Royko. Look at him. And Jeff McGill, the bartender, who's there for more than 30 years, said, "Come on, be quiet. Look at him. Big shot, big man, big Mike Royko." And Jeff said, "You want me to throw him out?" And Mike said, no, let him be. So this goes on for 10, 15 minutes. The guy's pounding shots. Like, yeah, Mr. Royko, you look so much smaller in person. Mike's not saying anything. Mike's kind of doing his best to ignore him. I'm doing my best to ignore him. Yeah, you look a lot balder in person too than you do in your picture. It's inane kind of insults. And so then the guy gets up at one point. And in those days, for a few years before and after, I would always try to get in the middle of Mike in any potential barroom trouble, because if something happens to me, nobody's going to care. Mike gets in a row, it's going to be, Walter Jacobson's commentary that night. And so he comes over and I go, "Come on, man, leave us alone. What's the problem?" He goes, "Oh yeah, big man. Thinks he's a big shot. Big shot. He wouldn't give me an autograph, would he?" And I say, "No, I don't think he would." No, and Mike says, and Mike occasionally, after about 3 drinks, would speak in a semi-British accent, which I never understood. I would ask him about it at the time, and he didn't say, "Pray tell, what are you talking about?" And I'd ask him a couple of days later, and he'd go, "What are you, nuts? I don't speak a British accent." But he was. So he goes, "Your name, my good lad, your name." Oh, wow, Mr. Royko, it's not for me. It's not for me. It's for my uncle. It's for my uncle. His name is Uncle Henry. I'm so sorry I was being so mean. I didn't mean that. I got laid off today, blah, 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 blah. Mike says to Jeff, the bartender, Jeffrey, my good fellow, fetch me a pen, fetch me some parchment and a quill. And Jeff is like, huh? You want a billy goat bag and a pen? Yes, my liege. So he brings it over. The kid is going, oh, Mr. Royko, this is so nice. You make it out to Uncle Henry, my Uncle Henry. Puts it down. Take this and be gone. The kid takes it, he reads it, goes, oh, Mr. Royko, this is so great. This is just so great. Can I buy you guys a drink? Be gone, I say. And the kid starts to leave. And I go, no, let me see what he wrote. I think the greatest sentence Mike Royko ever wrote. Dear Uncle Henry, your nephew is an asshole. Sincerely, Mike Royko. And the thing that gets me is, that this Uncle Henry had that thing framed and put in the basement in Schaumburg or Tinley Park or Northfield or someone. And my other hope is that every time he has guests over, hope he's still alive, they'll look at this and they'll say, your nephew really is an asshole. It's nice to see people. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick.